Hi, Amy.
Hi.
Hi, Yaakov.
Hello, good evening. Good evening, everyone.
Oh, you have a different T-shirt today.
A different what?
T-shirt.
No, I wouldn't dare put on the green one. I don't want to be accused of, again, being Irish. So it's just
Yeah,
normal blue.
the luck of the Irish.
So they say,
Mm-hmm.
I never knew what that meant, but yes, that is the expression.
You read the story
I
about
think-
in air
I
this
think
morning.
we're on 113,
Correct.
right, page 113. Touching concealed areas of the body. We're on page 113, continuing the Hilchos Netilas Yadaym. Touching concealed areas of the body during the meal.
Mejor que lo que me hizo el sastre a ella, porque está un poquitito así más largo atrás y así tiene que estar.
All right.
That was French, right? Never mind.
Under what circumstances must a person perform the Netilas Yadayim a second time during the meal, even if he did so once beforehand? The Shulchan Aruch writes that if one touches concealed areas of the body during the meal, you must perform the Netilas Yadayim again. Misha omid besuda, b'nizkar shenaga b'shok, that's your calf, the yarech, the thigh, u'makomos ha'mechusim ba'adam are other hidden areas, or shechichech barosho, or that he scratched his head. V'chol kayotze bazeh. U'v'makomos ha'metunafim sheyesh behem milmulei zeya, dirty places that are full of sweat. Tzorach lachzor v'litol yoda v'yivarach al Netilas Yadayim. You have to go wash again and make another bracha. Rav Menashe Klein, who's a contemporary prosek, writes in Mishnah Halachos that he's uncertain about the halach in a case in which someone touches one of these areas during a meal, but does not want more bread. Somebody asked him, "B'misha noga be'emtza suda," someone touched a concealed area. Oh, he siach das, or he was distracted. The often shetzarich lachzor v'litol yodov. He also lechol gam shar macholim shenem tzrichim netila. Can you eat the rest of your food, not bread, that doesn't require netilas yadayim? O davka pashu do asr leechol. If he wants to continue to eat bread, then he has to go wash again. Aval shar dvarim oichel b'li netila, given the bracha in tzarich mechadash. But other foods he may eat without netilah, since they don't require new bracha. B'nei b'shulchan aruch Orach Chaim, simin kuf samech dalid, chasuv stam detzarech lachzor v'litol yoda. The Shulchan Aruch didn't distinguish between these two cases. He just said a general rule that you have to wash again. The Mishnah Halacha suggests the following proof. According to Shulchan Aruch, if a person needs to recite a tefillah in the middle of his meal, for example, a minyan for mincha beginning at that time, that is not considered a hefsek in terms of the brachos he recited previously on the food. Meaning, if he comes back after mincha to finish his meal, he doesn't have to make all the brachos again, even though he must wash his hands for purposes of tefillah. Even though you have a netilah for davening, right? Misha niska b'toch hasuda shelo yispalo v'amad v'yispalo. The person remembers during his meal that he didn't daven, and he stood up to daven. Afilu im ein shos li more sudasol yispalo. And even if there's not enough time to first finish the meal and then pray, and then complete the tefillah before the zman goes away, shechayev lahapsik there he's obligated to be mafsik. The efshar lo lechol achi yispalel im kol ze lo v'hefsik. So if it's his man mincha, he has to interrupt and he can't eat, but it's not considered a hefsek. He doesn't have to go wash again, lechura, or make brachos again. The poskim derive this rule from the Gemara's explanation regarding the karpas at the Pesach Seder. The Gemara Masechta Pesachim states that even though one's mind is distracted from the Netilat Yadaym of Orchatz, which is washing before the karpas, by the recitation of the Haggadah, thereafter, Magid, there is no hefsek with respect to the brach on the karpas, right? We made bore pri adama when we eat our potato. Those of us who are Galicianers eat a potato. Some eat parsley or celery, whatever. So you make a bore pri adama, and then when you eat the moror later on, after you have magid and everything, you don't make another bore pri adama. We don't view all those other things as a hefsek. Therefore, one does not recite another bracha of bore pri adama when consuming the moror. The Mishnah Halachos notes that although a new bracha is not necessary for the food, in the case of the Shulchan Aruch, the Magen Avraham does require washing one's hands again, since one may not have properly kept them clean. This would certainly be true in the case in which a person is aware of having touched concealed portions of the body. Nevertheless, the Mishnah Halachos argues that this applies only when one wishes to eat bread afterwards. But for other foods that did not require Netilat Yadayim, initially no additional Netilat Yadayim is required. So you don't have to do another Netilat Yadayim if you touched a part of your body, if you're not planning to eat bread. Says the Mishnah Halachos, V'nirli lavi rayim siman kufayin chef siv vav, which is the siman regarding moror, which is the siman regarding tefillah. The tefillah law v'hesek linyan suda. If you had to daven in the middle of the suda, it's not a hefsek. Because of Magen Avraham mikol makom netilas yadayim boi, you would require when you go back to the meal netilas yadayim davi hesek hadas, because you took your mind off the fact that you did netilas yadayim for the food. Then you went to daven, you got to do it again. V'chein mashma gvor perek arvei psochim uvetur natal yodav v'tibul rishon. You washed your hands by the karpas. We do another Netilas Yadayim before the Amotzi, my time. Huh? I did the by Lomer Agadatov Halila. Since you now did the Magid and you did the Hallel, you were distracted. B'nei Pashut, the after boy Netilas Yadayim Mishum Mesach Hadas Leinin Brochel or boy Lasser Levare. That you might require Netilas Yadayim because you davened and you had Hesach Hadas, but you don't need another bracha. And he says, Umuter lechol dvarim de lo boy netila b'li netilas yadayim. That if you went to daven in the middle of the meal, you come back, you don't require netilas yadayim if you're not planning to eat bread. If you're planning to eat bread, you do netilas yadayim, but you don't make a bracha. L'dochek tzas, even though it deviates from the simple reading of the Shulchan Aruch, mikol makom nira, the shar macholos muter lechol. He can eat other foods. V'lo amru el lepas the boy netilas yadayim. When the Shulchan Aruch said you need netilas yadayim, it's only for bread. V'lo gara emtza suda mitchiloso. Right, the middle of the suda is not worse than the beginning. The kol shemetchila muter below netilas yadayim. Achanami be'emtza suda muter. Anything that does not require Netilas Yadayim at the beginning of the Suda certainly would not require the Emsa Suda. Umiyum yadav nesu ovos. If he has really dirty hands, yachal nakos al koparim ala shulchan. You can clean them at the table. The ulai roy levarch beinon. Your hands have to be at least clean enough to recite a bracha. It's sufficient to just clean your hands. You don't need the formal Netilas Yadayim with the kli and the revius and all of that. Despite his tentative conclusion that Netilas Yadayim is not necessary when eating food other than bread, after contact with the concealed portions of one's body, the Mishnah Halachos rules in practice that one must indeed wash again for all foods due to a different consideration. Mishnah Halach rules elsewhere, based upon the Gemara in Yoma 30a, that one who uses the restroom in the middle of a bread meal must wash again, even if he only plans to drink. The Ramah explains that the reason is because he may ultimately eat bread as well, for which another Netilat Yadaym is certainly required. Person went to the bathroom in the middle of the Suda to urinate. Notel yado achas sheshiv shifpa. He certainly should wash the hand that cleaned himself off. Ve'eno notel ela b'fnei kulam. He should wash, and everyone should see him. Shelo yachshtu shelo notel. People shouldn't be suspicious of him that he didn't do Netilat Yadayim. V'animi lishtos, and that's even to drink. Avalechol noitel afilu b'chutz. That he can wash outside. Everyone knows he's going to be washing. The Meda Yada, the Anina Daite V'lo'achal B'lo Netila. Everyone knows he's going to wash. He's not going to eat without washing. Says the Ramah. He requires Netilat Yadayim even just for drinking, because we're concerned he's going to eat. But if it's not during a meal, you don't have to do a Netilah to drink. The Magen Avraham clarifies that he must also recite the bracha of Netilat Yadayim unless he plans just to drink, in which case he washes his hands without a bracha. So after the bathroom, when you come back to the Suda to eat, you have to wash with a bracha, says the Magen Avraham. The Mishnah Halacha proves from here that any food or drink consumed in the middle of the meal requires Netilah after one has used the restroom. The same holds true for any time one touches a concealed portion of the body. Today, most people wash their hands after using the restroom in any case. So the rules formulated in this source are not specifically novel. However, what may be novel to some of us today is that many poskim hold that the bracha of Netilat Yadayim must be recited. See the Shulchan Aruch, Mishnah Berurah, Chazon Ish. Despite this approach, common practice is to follow the approach of the Marshal and other Achronim, who hold that the bracha of Netilat Yadayim is recited only once over the course of a meal, even in those situations. And other poskim who take that approach include the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Baal Tanya, Kaf HaChaim, and the Piskei Tshuva. So that's certainly most people's minhag. What do we do about Netilat Yadayim when you have no water? This always came up in camp when we were on overnight. What does one do if there's only a limited amount of water, no water for Netilat Yadayim? How should one wash Netilat Yadayim if one is on a trip or a hike without sufficient water for washing? Alternatively, what does one do if one has access to water from a faucet, but no cups or other vessels for washing are available? As we learned in Shiur 2, contemporary poskim agree that in today's conditions, when cold taps do not draw from filled utensils or comparable rooftop tanks, one may not simply turn on the faucet and place one's hands underneath. This means that if someone does not have access to a cup or vessel, it is halachically equivalent to not having any water. What does one do in these cases? We have already seen a number of possibilities for leniencies in cases of great need. including using a minimum of revius, perhaps even for multiple people, or washing only to the knuckles and not to the wrist. However, what should one do if even those leniencies do not suffice? The poskim discuss alternative options of how to act based upon the following Gemara Masechta Chulin. Ibailu, ma'ula echol b'mapo. Can you wear gloves? Or you have, you eat with a cloth on your hands. Mi chayshinan dilmanaga olo. Are we concerned that still that he will touch the food with his hands or not? Damar of Tachlifa Baravimi Amar Shmuel, hitiru mapa la'ochle truma. That they allowed eating bread while the hands were wrapped with cloth rather than washed for Kohanim. V'lo hitiru mapa la'ochle taharos. But people who eat even their chulin food in a state of tahara, they are not permitted to use cloth because they're not as careful as Kohanim. According to the answer given by the Gemara, it's only permitted for Kohanim eating truma to hold the food with a cloth, not with their hand, if they cannot perform it to Yadaym. But non-Kohanim who wish to eat their food in a state of tahara may not use a cloth, since they will not be careful enough to avoid touching the food with their unwashed hands. Rabbeinu Yonah, the Rishon, understands that the conclusion of the Gemara forbids all non-Kohanim to eat bread by merely covering their hands with a cloth. Says the Maskana, commentary on the Rif here in Brachos Mem Beis, Yitiru mapalochle truma. They allowed Kohanim to eat bread holding the bread with a cloth because they didn't have water. The Kohanim's reasoning lo yigav pas. Kohanim are careful; they won't touch the bread. There were people who were machmer on themselves to eat their foods b'tahara, even their non-hegdish food. They were lo yitiru. The gazrin and dilma yigav pas. There was a gzeira that maybe they'll touch the bread. Veneer de kol shekel shabnei adam, regular people like us, she'eino ochlin chulin b'tahara, we don't eat our chulin b'tahara, ve'enan nizram kol, we're not careful. She'eino lechol pas, kol davar she'tibul b'mashkal yadei mapa. We don't eat bread without washing, and we don't have to wash, we can't use a cloth. The gazrin and dilma yigu b'pas. We're concerned that you might touch the bread. On the other hand, the Rambam permits eating bread using a cloth. Hilchos Brachos Lametes. Lat Adam es yadav. A person can wrap his hands in a cloth. V'oichel behen pas. Or davar shetibul b'mar, something that avapish lo natal yadav. Even though he didn't wash his hands, he didn't have water for Netilat Yadayim. The Beis Yosef explains that according to the Rambam, the Gemara only forbids non-Kohanim eating non-truma foods using a cloth when they do so in a state of tahara. But since the Netilat Yadayim is only required when eating non-truma foods, normally as a preventative decree to ensure that truma is eaten in a state of tahara, using a cloth is acceptable when water is unavailable. It's not like we're tamei and the whole point of Netilat Yadayim is as a gzeira that we won't come to eat truma b'tahara. That's not a reason to forbid using the cloth. Says the Beis Yosef, in trying to understand where the Rambam is coming from. Nirish Shadai Loimar, the Davka ba'ochlei chuleim b'taharas kodesh or truma, that people who are eating their chulin, either b'taharas kodesh, they're keeping a sanctity level like kodshim or truma. Those people were not allowed to use a cloth. Aval chulin grady, but to eat regular chulin, lo, there's no iser. The kivin de lobon Netilat Yadayim, the only reason for Netilat Yadayim, anyways, is misum srach tuma, because of we want to be stringent on truma. Lo gosru tfeini v'truma. they weren't more machmir than with truma. Fichach, bilchos brachos, the osik bachilos chulin gravy, by the laws of brachos, where you're talking about just eating chulin, so the Rambam allowed you to eat your bread holding a cloth. The Beis Yosef adds the middle view in the name of their Aruch, that based upon the Gemara in Psachim 46a, one must travel at least 4 mil forward or 1 mil backward to obtain water. But if that is not possible, then one may eat bread holding a cloth. So you can't just stamazor. If you know there's bread 4 kilometers ahead, you got to walk 4 kilometers. If you are on a hike, we don't require you to go back more than 1 kilometer for water. If it's more than 1, going back, you don't have to go back and you can rely on the leniencies.
Yeah, Ernie, how about other liquids besides water?
They haven't said,
Will that be covered?
well, they haven't said yet that you can use another liquid.
Okay.
Didn't we have last week that you could use like fruit juice?
Yes.
So we discussed that a little bit.
Oh, I
last-
wasn't around. Okay.
We talked about water that changed in appearances.
Yeah, I don't remember juice. We talked about the appearance of the water, yes.
May one use clear soda for Netilat Yadaym if water is unavailable? According to the Or L'Tzion, one may perform the Netilat Yadaym with soda water, seltzer, or lemon lime soda such as Sprite or 7-Up, as the carbonation is not considered a shinui. In case of need, Rav Moshe Stern and the Be'er Moshe rules that one may even use a colored fruit drink for Netilat Yadayim, since the consistency is mostly water. Although the color of the water is changed, this does not invalidate the water for Netilat Yadayim if the change improves the liquid, as it has them from the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, page 99, footnote 6. So you may use other fluids.
Remember that.
Back to 117 and the Aruch, or back to the Beis Yosef. Va'arach kosov be'erech gival dahadar minan be'perek elu oivrin u'be'perek ha'orva roitiv, which is a perek in Chulin, l'netilas yadayim dalid mil. If you have to go forward dalid mil to find water. Shim yesh l'fanav barachak dalid mil mayim. You know for sure that within 4 mil ahead of you, there's water. Lo yoichalad shegiel l'mayim v'yito yadav. And you're on a trip. You got to walk another 4 mil before you eat, so you can wash properly. Now, if you know there's no water until 5 kilometers, so then you don't have to. And that would be considered you don't have water, and then you can use the heter.
Where's the 4 forward and 1 back come from?
It's a Gemara. It's a Gemara in Chulin and a Gemara in Psachim that say if you don't have water, what do you do? So the Gemara there discusses you got to walk further if you know for sure that there's water there, and then you can't eat until you get to the water and you do Netilas Yadayim. Now, let's say you know there's water only 6 kilometers ahead of you. Then it's as if you don't have water and you can use the leniency and stop here and eat.
Eat with something over your hands, or eat
Yes, with a cloth. That's what we've been learning so far, with a cloth. That means you hold on to the bread without your hands. We don't make him go back even a kilometer backwards. Below Netilah. Perush bloy chamsas sholat yoda b'mapa. Means you wrap your hand in a cloth so that you don't touch the bread with your hands. the Shulchan Aruch rules in accordance with the oral. In ein mayim mitzuyim lefon of bericha yoytzer me'arba milin, lachrav meals. If there is no water behind him for 1 meal or water in front of him 4 meal, yitol yadav b'mapa. You just wrap your hands with a cloth for oichel pas, and then you can eat bread or davar shetibul b'mashka, something that you dip in a liquid. The Mishnah Berurah explains in more detail that the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch applies when one is traveling. If one expects to find water within a distance of 4 mil in the direction of his destination, he must wait to eat the bread until he's able to form the Yadaym further along his journey. Alternatively, if one can obtain water within 1 mil in the opposite direction, going backwards, one must do so. However, if these options are not possible, then one may rely on the leniency of eating bread while holding it with a cloth. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ritzon Eloymar, he's explaining that the Shulchan Aruch is talking about kishoylech baderech. You're traveling, umishaer, and you calculate shleimotzi mayim af berachot yotzim arba milin. There's no rest stop within 4 meal. So in that situation, they permit you to eat with your hands covered. But if he calculates if he's going to find water within 4 mil, he should wait or behind him 1 mil. You don't have to go back 4 mil, just 1 mil. And if you know you're not going to find water in those dimensions, you can eat with the cloth leniency. If you're in doubt, and he's very hungry, so even a suffix, you don't know for sure, that gives you the right to eat without the Netilas Yadaym. There are a number of important practical points that must be clarified with respect to the issue of how far one must go to obtain water from the Netilas Yadaym before allowing the use of a cloth. The first is how these distances apply to someone who's not traveling. The Mogen Avram posits that under average circumstance, a person must go 4 mil, similar to one who's traveling forward to obtain water. That means wherever you are, if you don't have water, you're not traveling, you're at home, but you don't have water for whatever reason, you got to go seek out water, 4 mil, right? The Yerushalmi states, Shomer Ginos Upardesim, if you're a watchman of gardens, Kila Achrav Dami, so it's like someone traveling backwards, Ayin Sham, and he leaves it with a tzarchiyun that if somebody is not like out in the field, but if he's at home, he'd have to go even 4 mil. But
When you say that, Ernie, excuse me,
Yeah.
when you said that you have to travel 4 forward or 1 back, if you know there's water, but what if you don't know there's a kli with that water?
So if you don't know what, if there's a kli, it's the
There's
same
a
thing.
kli.
We said if you don't have a kli, it's considered as if you don't have water.
So you can know that there's water, but no kli, and it's as if there's no water.
Correct? We said nowadays, our water doesn't go into a container and then flow out of a faucet. If it did that, remember we had some opinions that said that would be okay. But our waters don't do that. So it would be considered as if you didn't have water. And then the Mishnah Berurah gave us a big leniency that if you're in a suffix, whether there's water there, and I would maintain, like you said, Sai, even without a kli, you don't know there's a kli, that's part of the suffix, and therefore you wouldn't have to do it. Now, this is the Mogen Avram. The Chai Yadaym of Danziger, Mishnah Berurah, hold that one who is not traveling has to go 1 meal in a 1 meal to find water. They only have to go less than a meal. Like going backwards. Yeah, they have to stay where they are. If you're at home and you have no water, you have to go searching for water only less than a meal. It's only when one was traveling forward, and there they told you to wait until you get 4 mil further to find water. But that doesn't apply to when you're at home. The second issue that must be addressed is how to understand the measurements given in the Shulchan Aruch here of 1 or 4 mil. Does this refer strictly to the distance given, or does it refer to the time it takes to walk 4 mil? The practical difference between these two options relates to when one uses other methods of transportation, not walking, such as a car. If it is based upon distance, then one would never need to travel more than 1 or 4 mil to obtain water, even if such a trip only takes a few minutes by car. If it's based upon the time, then if one is driving, one would have to drive for the amount it takes to walk 1 mil, which is approximately 18 minutes, even if the distance is much further than a mil. Others are more stringent and calculate the time to walk a mil as being 22 or 24 minutes, but the consensus for a meal is 18 minutes. So you understand, driving from here 18 minutes is 50 miles, maybe 30 miles, much more than a meal. So the Bir Halacha, who is the Chafetz Chaim, writes that within the context of Netilat Yadaym, one calculates a meal based upon time. Therefore, if one travels using a method faster than walking, one would need to travel for 18 minutes to obtain water, even if the distance was further than 1 or 4 mil. Now, look at the footnote 24. It should be noted that in other contexts, the halacha may be different. For instance, with respect to obtaining water for washing hands before tefillah, where the measurements of 1 and 4 mil are also mentioned by some poskim as the standard for how far one must travel, the Mishnah Berurah writes that it is always determined based upon distance and not based upon time. With respect to traveling to participate in a minyan, poskim disagree. Rav Vosner writes that one need only travel the distance of a mil, regardless of the method of transportation. It means if you have a car, it might take you only 2 minutes. Rav Moshe Sternbuch, on the other hand, writes that if one has a car available, one must drive at least 18 minutes to join a minyan. All of these poskim may hold that the case of Netilat Yadayim prior to a meal is stricter than a minyan, because one who does not wash his hands actively violates a rabbinic prohibition of eating without Netilat Yadayim. Back to 120. Umistaver dikshu nosea begamla parcha. If he goes like a train, like a flying camel. Ein choshvin l'fi orech haderech. We don't do it a mil. El l'fi cheshbon hazman shel hiluch daled milim. It's how long does it take you to walk daled milim? That's 18 times 4, it's 72 minutes. Let him beinu shushir ayin beis minutin. The Piskei Teshuvos accepts the Bir Halacha's argument and writes that one should assess the measurement based on the time it takes to walk 1 or 4 mil and not based on the distance, which is 18 or 72 minutes. If you're traveling, you want to eat bread, if you know that there is a water source within 72 minutes of your drive, then you should not eat in the car. Chayiv lahamtin, should wait until you get the water. If it's going to be 2 hours, then you can eat without the netila. B'mtzarach listos imrachavo. Now, if he has to go out of his way, b'shvil hagil ha'makom sheyesh mayim Yisha'er in bizman nesir 18 dagot yagil l'makom hamayim. He should assess, can he get to this place that he's changing directions within 18 minutes? If he can, chayav lasos ken. Vein lo heter locho b'krikos mapal yadav. But if he can't get to that place within 18 minutes, then you can eat without the netilah. So we saw above in source 46 that the Ramah offers an alternative solution, using a spoon. The Mishnah Berurah writes that many Achronim find difficult with this ruling and recommend using a cloth. Ayadei kaf. Achronim niskashu b'zeh. The monolay Ramah dinzeh. Where did Ramah get that you can eat with a spoon? B'shani ma'apish yada mechusa. A cloth covers your hand. Mashenkin b'zeh sheyada megula. When you eat with a spoon, your hand is revealed. I shouldn't fade del ma'asil. You're going to come to touch the bread. Uve'el Yerabba, one of the Achronim, Yeshu b'doichek. He explained it with difficulty. Ayin shava kol nira. Im yesh l'mapa yichroch b'mapa davka. Kricha b'mapa is the preferred leniency. Page 122. Women and Netilas Yadayim. The Ben Ish Chai writes that women are obligated in performing Netilas Yadayim, though in his time and locale, not all women were careful to fulfill the mitzvah. The Ben Ish Chai lived in Iraq, in Baghdad, like in the late 1800s to the early 1900s. Chiv Netilas Yadayim bein al hanoshim bein al hanoshim. It's a chiyuv for men and women. Uvav neseinu harabim, due to our sins, yesh kam noshim shochim v'lo netilas yadayim. There are women who eat without the netilas yadayim. Vein margishin bechet nasalam keheter, and their sin it becomes like heter. Yesh choshvin kiven dein yoidim levarich birchas hamozon. Since the women didn't know how to bench, kam netilas yadayim lo yivarchu, then they won't make a broch of netilas yadayim. The tzarech lo diem de lo taya, but one is not connected to the other. The tzarech kolorim lashgiach abnei beso. Every family man should make sure that his women washed. Lo diem chomer adavar, and how stringent it is. V'yazirem tamid v'gam yichanach iladav aktanim, and to educate his children. Afal pishlo balu chol chiyuv, before their bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah. Kadei sheyargilu bekach mikatnuso. Rav David Auerbach in Halichos Beita explains that both reasons that were discussed for Netilas Yadayim in the previous year concerning eating truma and due to holiness apply to women. He says right away as a chiyuv. Women ate truma if Bas Yisrael was married to a Kohen, so they could eat truma. And of course, daughters of Kohanim could eat truma. And the concept of holiness also applies to women. So let's have a dvar machshava. We have seen that two reasons are given in the halachic literature for the institution of Netilas Yadayim before eating bread. The Maharal in Netivos Olam expands on the more theological and spiritual significance of Netilas Yadayim. Ha'adam hazeh, this human being, asher bara'o Hashem, that Hashem created, Yisbarach, v'ratza l'zachoso, wanted to give him merits, ulataro, and to purify him, min pchisaso agashmi, from the fact that he's a physical being, which makes him a low person. L'kach kasher adam notel agashmi, when the human being turns towards something physical, i.e. eating, da'hainu achilo shtiya shalom, shehi gufanit, this is a physical act as opposed to a spiritual act. Shelo yanot legamrei el gashmi, he shouldn't turn completely to the physical. L'kach hamitzvah shekodim sheyochel v'yishteh yitol es yado. So he's commanded to wash his hands before he eats and drinks. Kidover zehu kedusha. This is something that is a holiness thing. Kamoshi is bayer. Ve'az einota b'achila shel gashmi. It sort of restrains his eating. So it won't just be a purely physical act. When a horse or a cow, when they eat, it's just a physical act. So we want to divert from that. The Od says the Maral, Ki achila shel adam ein roi lo adam sheyeh betuma, dover shehu parnasaso. When you eat, which is going to sustain him, it should be in a state of purity, not in a state of impurity. According to Maral, the holiness inherent in the act of washing one's hands prepares a person for a meal, which is essentially a strictly physical act. Thus, the kedusha that a person brings upon himself when performing the Netilat Yadaym will ensure that his physical action of eating is also transformed into a spiritual one. Rav Eliezer Melamed, the Pninei Halacha, elaborates on this theme in his Pninei Halacha. If you're involved in an action involving nutrition or something that is vital for your life, so too, as an act is vital for a person, so is its influence on the person, either for good or bad. So around the eating process, which is a very important activity to allow the human being to continue to exist. We have a lot of halachos regarding eating. People eat, it satisfies a temporary pleasure. It's also to have in mind when you eat that you want your life to be full of content and meaning. Therefore, all the halachos surrounding eating have one goal. We should have good feelings around eating. And give us strength to participate in tikkun olam. We shouldn't descend so that our soul is involved in the gluttonous act of eating, which is lacking any kind of spiritual aspect. By bread, that's the staff of life. Our hands and our fingers is how humans carry out most of their actions. It's with our hands that we do good actions. And the opposite, ma'asim roim, bad actions. They have special movement ability. Efshar larimotam, el me'al harosh, you can lift your hands above your head. Ve'efshar larimat, you can break them low. Hein ochzos, they grasp things. Noigois, they touch. Umeshamshos, because they touch everything. Valkain, hein alulos litlachek yoter mishar varim. Your hands become more dirty than other parts of your body. Even shezachlita sudalanik tosfot koch v'chiyunit, since the point of our meals is to give us nutrition. Anu matarim yadayim mezuama, we clean our hands from sweat and dirt shadavka ben toch yitzukei alam, that we're dealing with during the day. Mekachnos on the cross suda, and we sanctify them for the suda kadesh nuchal lishovna ochel, in order to derive from the food et achiyonita nitzrechet l'chayim v'la'ei tochen erchi, to have a full life full of content. And that's what Chazal mean in Sota Dal Amid Beis. Kol ha'oichel lechem b'lo Netilat Yadayim ki'ilu ba'alisha zona. The Gemara had a very unusual statement. Whoever eats bread without Netilat Yadayim, it's as if he had relations with a lady of the evening. Gama achila, the gama ava, shebein ish leisha, eating, and relations between man and women, chiyunit mod v'kiyumo shalem, are very important and vital for man's existence. Uchma kol davar b'chayenu, like anything else in our lives, efshar lasotan b'kedusha, you could do it with holiness, or chas v'chalila lehepeh. Uchashem shetzivta Torah, shelo lehov derech znut. We're not supposed to love another woman just out of lust. Ela rak al yedei chuppah v'kiddushin. There's a holy act that binds men and women in Judaism. Kach tiknu chachamim shenitul Yadaym lifnei asuda. Uvekach netaher v'nekadesh l'achilatenu. Through this act, we purify and sanctify our eating. Aval misha ochel b'lo netila, ki'ilu ochel lechem tamei, shkenu min yachis rak l'tzad hagashmi shebelechem. You're leaning towards the physical aspect. Of course, he sends us to the Maharal in the Netiva Avodah, who began this concept. If we take a moment before performing the Netilat Yadayim to consider its spiritual benefits, in addition to only fulfilling the obligation of the halacha, hopefully we will successfully transform our meal into a spiritual experience as well that allows us to achieve more closest to Hashem. So next week, we will learn about chatzitzas regarding the Netilat Yadayim. What is a chatzitza, and rings and other things. Why is it a problem? And then we'll have a fourth aspect of the Netilat Yadayim. Doing the Netilat Yadayim, not necessarily for bread, but for things that we dip, foods that we dip, and other dinim that apply to Netilat Yadayim. Okay, any comments, questions? I wrote. No.